stuff. Okay, what we're going to do first, now first of all, let me introduce you to the room that we are in. The room we are in is called Milestones of Flight. In this one room, with one exception, we have the most historically significant pieces of our aeronautical and space collection. The Creel board crop of the National Air and Space Museum is in this one room. Okay, the one thing that is missing, we have its own digs up behind the black airplane on the second floor. There's a Wright brothers airplane. And we will go and examine that much more closely in just a few minutes. The most important stuff in our collection is right in this museum, in this one room, Milestones. When I begin a space tour, I ask the first question, and that is, do any of you ladies and gentlemen know what the first creature in space was?
Monkey.
I'm sorry?
Oh, no.
A dog is the correct answer. Yes, ma'am. Do you know the dog's name? Honestly, I'm sorry? Leica. Okay, since she said dog, you said Leica. Do you know what Leica means? All right, let me ask my experts here. My three youngest people in our tour, let me ask you three a question, all right? It's a real easy question, okay? How does a dog communicate? Barking. Ladies and gentlemen, Leica. All right? English, Barker. Not barking, but very close. We'll give it to you. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Barker. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't make this stuff up. I just report it. This is the first creature in space. And ladies and gentlemen, she is a slow dog. How do I know she's a slow dog? Because she's a Moscow mutt. She was hanging off on the streets of Moscow. The people that run their space program over there caught her, threw her in a spacecraft, shot her into space, and she did not survive the trip. She asphyxiated on orbit. About a month before she went up in Sputnik 2, Sputnik 1, that silver ball above you, was launched. That is the first man-made thing in space. That is October 4th, 1957. He stayed up there for 3 months and beat. That's all it did. It also scared the American populace half to death, thinking if they could do that, keep something up there for 3 months, launching something with an American city in the crosshairs, think missile, would be really easy. Now the Americans weren't thinking about that. The other Americans were thinking about putting something else up too. You see that pencil above you? That is America's first satellite, that Explorer 1 right there. That pencil was launched January 31st, 1958, made it into orbit, stayed there for 10 years, worked 4 months of life for the batteries, before it eventually came back down 10 years after launch. That's America's first satellite. Ladies and gentlemen, Sputnik and Explorer 1 up there is the starting line of what was known as the space race. That's the starting line. The spacecraft that says United States on the side, ladies and gentlemen, that's the finish line. Between those and it's just 12 years. And of course the finish line, anybody? The moon, yes. Now, moving on. First man in space, what's his name?
Yuri Gagarin.
Yuri Gagarin, April 12th, 1961. There he is, he's a Soviet, he's a cosmonaut. His real job, ladies and gentlemen, is a parachutist, because they could not land the spacecraft gently enough for somebody to survive the hard down on the ground. So a couple hundred meters above the earth, a couple thousand meters above the earth, they shot him out of the spacecraft, they ejected him, and he landed on the steppes of Siberia under a parachute. All right, 3 weeks later, America's first astronaut, what's his name?
Alan Shepard.
Shepard, first American in space. May 5th, 1961. The shape of Alan Shepard's spacecraft, ladies and gentlemen, this tiny little thing right here. Shepard's flight was suborbital, meaning you go up and you come right back down. Launch and splashdown, 300 miles apart or so, 100 miles high. He was in space 5 minutes. 5 minutes to space, 5 minutes in, 5 minutes home. Now, think about this. Everything you can do in space first, back then, they did, Soviets did. First creature, first satellite, first creature, first man, first woman, everything. President Kennedy was sick and tired of this, so he said to the chief of the Space Task Force, a guy named Lyndon Johnson from Texas, the vice president, he said to Johnson, find us something to do to beat the Russians. I don't know what it is, find it. A month later, he came back and said, Mr. President, we got to go to the moon. So ladies and gentlemen, let me give you the real reason why we went to the moon. It's either a 2-word or a 3-word answer. Anybody?
Beat the Russians.
Beat the Russians is a 3-word answer. That's the unofficial reason. What's the official reason? 2 words. Cold War. Okay, so we had to beat the Russians. National prestige is at stake. Now when Kennedy says we're going to go to the moon, we've been in space 5 minutes. How the heck are we going to get from here to there and back again in 8 years before this decade is out? And at that time, we weren't really sure we were going to be able to do it. Now, a while later, we have another Mercury go up. That's Grissom's. The first American to orbit the Earth, his name is John Glenn, and this is his spacecraft. This is Friendship 7. Friendship 7 launched off the Earth February 20th, 1962. Got into orbit about 10 minutes later, flew around the Earth 3 times, orbits the Earth 3 times, and comes back in. The total time he was away from the Earth was about 4 hours and 55 minutes. When he was up there, he could rotate the spacecraft like a rotisserie. He could rotate the spacecraft like a top. He could not change orbital altitudes. Now, think about this. What we've done in space today, compared to what they were thinking about doing in space in 1959, which is when Mercury started. Mercury was started to do something very grandiose back then. And that is to put a man in space and keep him alive out there for 24 hours. Think about that, 24 hours. Now the first 2 guys, all they did was breathe. Glenn brought with him a large toothpaste container full of applesauce, and that was his snack as he orbits the Earth. The last American in space alone in one of these was Gordon Cooper. Cooper stayed in one of these for 33 hours, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes, so the man did sleep. Now, that's our first steps off the planet. That's our first steps on another planet, albeit the moon. But still, bear with me. The thing in the middle is a proverbial middle sister that gets no respect whatsoever. She's not hardly mentioned or talked about. And this is Gemini, ladies and gentlemen. Gemini is hugely important to us getting to the moon. Now the spacecraft you're looking at there is Gemini 4. This is June 3rd, 1965. And what Gemini 4 did was carry 2 astronauts, of course, up. The guy sitting in the left seat, closest to the Earth back there, is Jim McDevitt. The guy sitting in that seat you can see with the hats missing, he is Ed White. They launch off the Earth, got into orbit. A couple orbits go by. When they cross over Hawaiian Islands, Ed White does this. He is the first American to walk in space. This is June 3rd, 1965. So Ed White doing this with 150 miles that way, somewhere between Hawaii and the eastern seaboard of the United States. Now, that cord you see winding itself around there, there's actually 2 of them. There's a cord with a piece of nylon rope holding him and the spacecraft together so he didn't go floating off. The other cord contains his oxygen supply line, the communication lines, and biomedical sensors. These biomedical sensors gave the man away. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. For all of you who like to go to the gym and exercise, go out on the track and go run laps. And a half hour later, your blood pressure is up, you're sucking wind, your heart is pounding, you're exercising. Think of what you do here on Earth. He was doing 150 miles that way. And the flight surgeon ordered him to come back in. Think about this. He is in the biggest room imaginable. Now, I've never been in space, but I understand there's no walls out there. So he's in the biggest room you could possibly be in, and he's going to climb into that little tiny hole. You can understand why just before he climbs into that little hole, he says to the ground below, "This is the saddest minute of my life." All right. 6 months go by. We are now up to Gemini 6 and Gemini 7. Gemini 6 and Gemini 7 will launch in December. Now, what they're going to do, this is Gemini 4, but 6 and 7 look identical to this. What they're going to do with 6 and 7 is prove 2 really important things on the steps towards the moon. Can we survive in space the time it takes us to get to and back from the moon? Minimum stay on the moon, which is 2 days. So it's going to take us 3, we're going to be up there for at least 8, meaning Gemini orbiting the Earth in December of 1965. So you have two guys in one of these little spacecrafts. I want to give you an idea how much room there is inside for the two guys. The Mercury astronaut was a man who was under 5 feet 11, under 180 pounds. They used that same size for Gemini. So think you and yours in the space of a Volkswagen Beetle with enough food and water and entertainment and work material for 2 weeks in that very little car. Not being able to get out, walk away, run around, none of that. You're in that car for 2 weeks. Everything you're going to do in that little car. You're not getting out. Imagine that. Think about that VW Bug, the old one. Now realize this, there's more room in that Bug than there is in one of these. And these two guys spent 2 weeks locked up in one of these, orbiting the Earth. They are Jim Lovell and Frank Borman. Now, by 10 days into the Borman and Lovell's flight, they're in Gemini 7. Gemini 6 shows up. Gemini 7 is a target, 6 finds it, and they orbit the Earth 5 or 6 times together. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you are in Gemini 7. The spacecraft that is dirting your window is Gemini 6. All right? 6 found 7 in orbit, and they period around each other for 5 or 6 orbits before 6 turns around and heads back home. Now, as I mentioned, there's 2 guys per spacecraft, 4 guys. Now, as I also mentioned, this is December of 1965. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this question. What is perhaps the most important, famous football game held every December? Anybody? It has to do with, it's a college level game. Usually played in Philadelphia.
Tostitos Bowl?
I'm sorry?
Tostitos Bowl?
Army Navy is the correct answer, sir. Remember, 4 guys. One of them brought up a little sign they put in one of the windows. See it? That's a sign that one of the astronauts who was a naval aviator, the rest of these guys were Air Force, he brought up a little sign that he stuck in the window. Now, give you an idea how real big the picture is, give you an idea what kind of eyesight these guys got. There's the actual size of the picture. So they have pretty good eyesight. Now, Gemini, they flew 10 missions. 2 guys per mission, and they will launch one every 6 weeks. They have launched 10 missions in a year and a half. When we started Gemini, the Soviets were comfortably ahead of us time and space. When we finished Gemini a year and a half later, we had caught up with them and left them way off behind us. Gemini, within this 10 missions, proved everything we were thinking about going to the moon will work, or, at least in one case, everything we were thinking about using on the moon would not. And that is what I'm talking about, the suit. The suit that Ed White wore in this picture is air-cooled. In Gemini 9, Gene Cernan was in this same kind of suit out there in space for 45 minutes. She's going to be out there for an hour and a half, but for 45 minutes he became so hot, so exhausted, so worn out because of the exertion he was doing in the suit cooling capability would not work. The man is in perfect physical specimen. His heart rate went up to 195 beats per minute. His visor fogged over because of the heat he was generating, his body heat. When they got him back here on the Earth, they poured 7 pounds of perspiration out of his boots. So you give me an idea how much this man was dealing with. This taught us a valuable lesson. Air-cooled in Gemini, the suits we will land on the moon in and walk around in were liquid-cooled. Much more efficient. All right? So, go from 1 man, 2 man, to 3 men in Apollo, 2 of which would walk on the moon. Let us wander over and talk about how we did that.
I'm checked in.
All right.
I'm B something. What are you?
Yeah, I'm B48.
Spacecraft
behind you.
Do this for me. Keep on walking around. This is the more interesting side of the This is the more interesting side of the spacecraft than that side. Because you want to be able to see this thing that looks like a big garbage bag full of trash. What you're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is a spacecraft called Lunar Module 2, LM2. LM2 and its predecessor, LM1, were unmanned test articles. Government welcome gave them to NASA. NASA sent Lunar Module 1 into space and did a myriad of tests. Its tests were so successful, Lunar Module 2 was not needed, and it was given to the museum. The only thing Lunar Module 2 did for the space program was they got it off the floor 6 or 8 feet, whatever it was, and they dropped it. They wanted to see how it would bounce, in other words, and it bounced pretty good. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you've never been to this museum before today, within a couple of years ago or before, when you had lunch in our cafeteria at the end of the building, you would walk by Lunar Module 2, when Lunar Module 2 looked like the unmanned test article it was, or it is. But a couple of years ago, the museum decided we're going to move it from there into here, and we're going to take and make Lunar Module 2 look like Lunar Module 5. Think of Cinderella the afternoon of the ball, where she's on her hands and knees scrubbing that floor in her rags. And then the fairy godmother shows up and goes poof, and turns this into the gown and the pumpkin and the white horses and all that. That is Lunar Module 5. What's the big deal about Lunar Module 5, ladies and gentlemen, is that is the craft that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would land on the moon by July 1969. So this is what the spacecraft that landed on the moon first looked identical to this. All right? Now you got 2 stages there. You got the bottom half, the legs, the foot pad, and the ladder. That's the descent stage. Thing on the top with the multifaceted stage and those 2 triangular windows there, that's the ascent stage. The whole thing lands on the moon, leaving the descent stage behind. Think lifting pad. The ascent stage returns back to the command module, orbiting the moon about 50 miles above it. And what we're going to talk about pretty much here in this stop is the last 50 miles to the moon and the first 50 miles home. The rest of the journey from the moon, from the Earth to the moon and back home, we're going to talk about in our next major stop. All right? Now, about almost 2 hours before they're going to land on the moon, on the far side, the command service module, lunar module combination, lunar module is this, of course, separate. And it starts to slow descent to the lunar surface. In other words, it takes them half the moon diameter in orbit from 50 miles of altitude to landing on the moon on the other side. All right. Now, as the astronauts are slowly descending from 50 miles to landing on the surface, they're looking out into space. They cannot literally see where they are going. But the last 5 minutes or so before touchdown, the spacecraft pitches over, and there is the moon stretched out in front of them. And it's here in Apollo 11 that Neil Armstrong will say to Houston, we are going to land long. We're going to land further away from where we expect to. And they continue the powered descent, the slow descent to the surface of the moon. Now in simulations for the past year or so, they had been landing on the moon at a certain time. In reality, when this happened in July 1969, that time came and went. Houston knew that something wasn't quite right, but they knew enough of the 2 astronauts' qualifications that you didn't hear anything from the ground to the spacecraft except one really major, really important fact that these guys needed to know. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. This marvelous piece of engineering. A piece of engineering that was designed to be operated only in the vacuum of space. All right? No gas gauge. Not a one. So they don't know how much, there's no gauge with an E or an F on it. So they don't know how much gas they got in their tank. Somebody in Houston does. He's got a console in front of him and he's got a stopwatch. So if you listen to the transcripts, you will hear somebody on the ground, he will say, beep, 60 seconds, beep. 30 seconds go by. Same tone, same voice, same thing again. But this time the man says 30 seconds. That is the only communication that the Houston will give to the astronauts. everything. So if you were to count down from that 30 seconds, did you hear, if you find the transcript, very easily done online, you will hear 15 seconds later, one of the astronauts in the spacecraft, Aldrin, you will hear him say, contact light. Next thing you hear is Neil Armstrong say those famous words. When they land on the moon, what does Neil Armstrong say, ladies and gentlemen? That's 13. All right, try again. What does he say when he lands on the moon?
One small step for man.
That's when he walks. I said land, sir. One more. Sir, what was that? The Eagle has landed. Houston, tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a very famous immortal saying, no question. The fun saying is what the ground responds back to the astronauts now safely on the moon. What does Houston say? Roger, Trank, and he stumbles on the word tranquility. So he says, Roger, Trank, tranquility. We got a bunch of guys that both have turned blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Now, the world would wait for 6 hours. 1/4 of the world's population, 1 billion people, will wait for 6 hours for these two guys to do 3 things. Get dressed, have some lunch, and get their spacecraft ready for immediate departure. Now let me ask my young friend here. If they take you to an amusement park, and it's like lunchtime, and you want to go out and have fun with all the rides, are you going to take a nap before you go on the rides? Do you want to take a nap before you go on the rides? Or you just want to go on the rides? You're taking a nap? Whoa, that's something new. No, wow, I was okay. All right. That's pretty okay. My young friend says, I'm taking a nap. They did. Yeah, Houston wanted them to take a nap. Land on the moon, have some lunch, get the spacecraft ready to go, put their suit on, and catch some Z's. The astronauts said, Houston, tranquility base here. Houston, we are no-go on that nap. And Houston said, all right. It's about 10:30 in the evening. Look, you can see the hatch, that square hatch clearly. Below the hatch, that left plate with the 2 handrails, that's called the porch. Look below the left handrail there, ladies and gentlemen, you will see a yellow handle about the size of your fist. It's called the D-ring, for obvious reasons. So, Armstrong backs out. When he goes by that D-ring, he gives that D-ring a good tug. And this thing that looks like a really full trash bag opens up like you see it here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, NASA, the Apollo program and space flight, NASA is hugely acronymed. Everything's got an acronym. So when they were coming up with the acronym for this deployed thing right here, they were going to call it Modular Equipment Storage System. And they said Modular Equipment Storage System. Okay, acronized, that is MES. That won't work. So what do? They change the last word. They go from system to assembly. MESA, MESA. What's the big deal about MESA? It's a little hard to see, but there's a small bulge just below the top of that MESA. For you guys over here, you can clearly see a camera lens. That lens is pointing right at the footpad. So at Armstrong, about 10:56 in the evening, takes his left foot, puts on the moon like we're showing here. That's where the camera is that documented. All right? Now he's on the moon alone for 20 minutes. Job 1 for this guy is to reach down and grab 2 fistfuls of dirt from the moon. They're called a contingency sample. Think about this. We've never been there. We don't know if we're going to be able to survive a minute, 10 minutes, 10 hours walking around. We don't know. We've never been. So what NASA wants him to do is grab 2 fistfuls of dirt, because if he has to get out of Dodge and they have to get off the moon in a heartbeat, there's some moon soil that we can at least analyze, albeit 2 handfuls. But ladies and gentlemen, Neil Armstrong is a pilot. He's an astronaut, yes, but he's a pilot first. Matter of fact, Armstrong had his pilot's license before his driver's license. Everybody goes out on your 16th birthday, gets a driver's license. He didn't. He went out and got a pilot's license. So what do pilots like to talk about more than anything else? They're flying machines. So what does he do for the first few minutes he's on the moon? Describe the spacecraft. Houston is after. Apollo 11, Eagle, Houston. Neil, we are looking for the contingency sample. A few minutes later, Earth to Neil Armstrong. Great, you get the idea. I'm not saying they did that, but they were bothering a man about doing it, and he said, okay, I got it. They would shut up. 20 minutes after he steps on the moon, Aldrin joins him. Now, for an hour and 50 minutes, they are together. They set up 2 scientific experiments, collect around 50 pounds of rocks and samples, set up the American flag, and they will get the ultimate long-distance phone call from then President Nixon before it's time to come back up. Now, just before they come back up, just before Armstrong leaves the moon, Aldrin goes up first, and they set up a trapeze setup, a couple pulleys on the end of 2 long, or a couple of string, or a couple of pieces of rope. So they would attach the rock boxes. Think of a briefcase, size of a briefcase, but about a foot thick. They could put the samples in and seal the vacuum of the moon in it, and then kind of clip it to the box, and Aldrin on top, he would do one of these numbers, and it'd go, go winched up inside the spacecraft. When they've done all that, Armstrong climbs back up. They take off their portable life supports in their backpack, throw it out the door, close the hatch, and they will spend the night on the moon. Now, there's not a whole lot of room up there, ladies and gentlemen. The crew compartment of this spacecraft is 6 feet wide, 6 feet high, 3 feet deep. 2 telephone booths. Talk about telephone booths. When's the last time any of us saw a telephone booth, let alone 2 together? Technology is wonderful. About 4 cubic meters of space is what we're talking about. 1 sleeps on the floor, 1 strings a hammock. The next morning is the most important day of these guys' lives to that moment, because that engine you see on the bottom, that's the descent stage engine. That is what got them on the moon. That is not what is going to get them off. Buried in the middle of all this, there's a little engine called the ascent stage engine. This little engine must work. If it don't work, they don't get home. Black and white, no gray here. Now, to help the situation out, that little motor has only 3 moving parts. When they flip the right switches and these 3 parts move, they're gone. Interestingly enough, one of the things that Aldrin says just before they take off, they lift off from the moon, he says to Houston, Houston, I understand we're number 1 on the runway. In other words, we don't have to wait for anybody to leave the moon for us. We're it. And they're gone. An hour and a half later, hour and 3/4 later, there is the command module right there where it's supposed to be. They dock with it. Everything going back to the Earth goes into it. Everything they don't need anymore stays with the lunar module. It is eventually crash lands on the moon months, if not a year or 2 later. Now, I want to give you guys an idea how much of the moon we'd explored in Apollo 11. It is from the Apollo 17 picture of our blue marble to the glass wall, from the granite wall to the granite wall. The room you're standing in is all of the moon Armstrong and Aldrin explored July 20th and 21st, 1969, right here. All right? Any questions before we press on, folks? Sir.
So this one not after Apollo, right?
This is part of Apollo, yes, sir.
So the module of Apollo.
This is the lunar module of Apollo, correct? Yes. Anybody else?
How did they pick Houston?
How'd they pick Houston? Remember that the Vice President of the United States, the Chief of the Space Task Force, Lyndon Johnson? What state's Lyndon Johnson from? Bingo. He's from Texas. That's why they chose Texas. Yep. Anybody else?
So is this a fully functioning lunar module or a replica?
This is a fully functional, this is a real spacecraft never used. All right?
What the last Apollo we have?
Apollo 17 is the last Apollo. That was December of 72. 6 Apollos landed on the moon. 12 men would walk on the moon. Ultimately, the 12 men that walked on the moon, there are 5 left today.
13 the one had problem, right?
13 did not land on the moon. 13 is the one that had the problem. Correct. Anybody else? All right. As I promised, I would show you the last 50 miles to the moon, the first 50 miles home. We've done that. Let us walk to the other room, and I'll show you how we got to the moon and back home. Right this way, guys. Walk straight. Turn around, walk. I'll catch up. Sorry.